I didn't react when my sister laughed at me. That's the part everyone remembers wrong. They assume I must have cried or snapped or caused a scene. I didn't. I stood there with a plastic cup in my hand, listening to her voice echo through a rented ballroom, and I stayed completely still. Not calm, not proud, just empty. The party was loud in that way, only graduation parties are. Too much music. Too many people who barely know each other, everyone pretending they're closer than they are. My sister's name was printed on a giant banner behind the podium. Her school colors were everywhere. The catering wasn't cheap. Neither was the venue. I noticed those details because that's what I do. When you live on Navy pay, you notice prices whether you want to or not. I was still in my service dress uniform because I'd driven straight from base. I didn't bother changing. I didn't think it would matter. It never crossed my mind that standing there in uniform would somehow turn me into a punchline. My sister stepped up to the mic like she'd practiced it in the mirror. She smiled wide, waited for the room to settle, then launched into her speech. She thanked our parents first, then her friends, then her professors. Then she thanked everyone who believed in her. That part got applause. I clapped too, because clapping felt easier than thinking. Then she glanced in my direction. Just a quick look, enough to make sure I was paying attention. She laughed and said, "And I guess I should thank my sister too. She always says she helped, but really, I did this on my own." A few people laughed, not everyone. Enough! She kept going. She talked about discipline, about hard work, about how she'd outgrown the small-town mindset. Then she said, "Some people choose college. Some people choose other paths." She shrugged like it was nothing. Not everyone is meant for more. That's when she smiled again. This time it wasn't nervous. It was satisfied. I felt eyes move toward me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew what they saw. A woman in a Navy uniform standing alone near the back. No degree, no speech, no microphone. Just the sister who didn't quite fit the story she was telling. I took a sip of my drink. Warm soda, flat. I remember thinking I should have grabbed water instead. If you've never been publicly dismissed by someone you sacrifice for, it's hard to explain how quiet it feels. There's no explosion in your head, no dramatic inner monologue, just a single thought that lands and doesn't leave. "So this is who you decided I am." The speech wrapped up. Applause filled the room. People stood. Someone whistled. My sister hugged our parents. Cameras flashed. The DJ turned the music back on like nothing had happened. I didn't move. Someone bumped into my shoulder and said, "Congrats to your sister," without really looking at me. I nodded. Someone else asked if I was in the military, like full-time or just reserves. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice yet. My sister finally made her way over, still glowing, still riding that high. She leaned in and said, "You okay?" Not concerned, careful, like she was checking to see if I'd ruin her night. "I'm fine," I said. That part was true. Fine is a low bar. She nodded relieved and said, "Good." I didn't want things to be awkward. Awkward, that was the word she chose. She walked away before I could respond. I watched her rejoin her friends. Watched her laugh again. Watched people treat her like someone important. I didn't feel angry, not yet. I felt misplaced, like I'd shown up to the wrong address. I left early. No announcement, no goodbye tour. I slipped out through the side doors and stood in the parking lot for a minute just breathing. The night air was cool, quiet, honest. I sat in my car and didn't turn the engine on right away. On the drive home, I kept replaying that line. I did this on my own. It wasn't even the mockery that stuck. It was the erasure. Years compressed into nothing, like they'd never happened. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and set my cover on the counter. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I ate leftovers straight out of the container and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. That happens when you're used to watch schedules. My phone was already lit up. Missed calls, texts, group messages I hadn't opened yet. I ignored all of it and went through my routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, uniform. It wasn't until I sat down at the kitchen table that something shifted. I opened my banking app without really thinking about it. Just habit. Check balances. Track bills. Make sure nothing bounced. That's when the numbers hit me. Years of transfers, tuition payments, housing deposits, bookstore charges, monthly support sent like clockwork. All from one account, mine. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to, not in shock. In clarity. That speech didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building. Every joke about me just being Navy. Every time she waved off my help like it was nothing. Every time she acted like I was lucky to be included in her life, instead of the other way around. I set my phone down and finished my coffee. There's a moment when something breaks cleanly. No mess. No warning. Just a line you don't cross back over. That morning, sitting alone at my table, I realized I wasn't hurt anymore. Hurt assumes expectation. This was different. This was recognition. And right there, before I ever spoke to her again, before anyone apologized or demanded explanations, I decided one thing very clearly. I wasn't going to argue with her version of events. I was going to let the truth do that for me. If you've been watching this and you've ever been the quiet one in your family, the one who shows up and pays up without getting credit, drop a comment. I read them. And if stories like this hit close to home, subscribing helps more than you think. I grabbed my keys and headed for base, already running through the day ahead. The party was over, the music had stopped, but something else had started moving steady and deliberate, and it didn't need an audience to keep going. I kept my hands on the steering wheel longer than necessary after I parked at base, staring straight ahead while the engine ticked itself cool. The thought from my kitchen table hadn't faded. It followed me through the gate, through the morning salute, through the walk across the lot. Let the truth do the talking. That meant I needed to hear it clearly myself, without excuses or softened edges. My day started the way most of them do. Briefing, checklists, paperwork that never seems to shrink no matter how many times you clear it. I did my job well. I always have. The Navy teaches you to compartmentalize, and I'm good at that. But between tasks, numbers kept lining up in my head without being invited. My pay isn't impressive. Anyone who's served knows that. It's steady, it's reliable, and it comes with strings most people don't see. Long hours, missed holidays, moves you don't vote on. You learn to plan around it, to squeeze it until it works. I did that for years, and not for myself. I pulled up my banking app again during lunch, not because I was spiraling, but because I needed accuracy. Memory lies when it's emotional. Numbers don't. I scrolled back month by month, year by year, watching the pattern form. Tuition payments timed perfectly with semester starts. Housing deposits labeled temporary. Bookstore charges that hit harder than they should have. Small transfers marked just in case. Larger ones that didn't bother with explanations. I remembered each one, not fondly, precisely. I remembered the first time she got accepted and called me crying, saying she didn't know how she'd make it work. Our parents helped when they could, but they were stretched thin. I was the one with a paycheck that showed up every 2 weeks. I was the one who said, "We'll figure it out." I meant it. I remembered skipping a trip with friends because her housing deposit was due early. I remembered buying used uniforms online instead of new ones because the bookstore bill had been higher than expected. I remembered sending money from a ship halfway across the world because her card got declined at a grocery store near campus. I didn't resent it then. That's the part people don't get. I chose it. The Navy doesn't leave much room for impulse spending, so my sacrifices were quiet. No dramatic gestures, no speeches, just adjustments. One less thing for me, one more thing covered for her. Over time, it stopped feeling like help and started feeling like maintenance, like if I missed one payment, the whole structure would wobble. By the time my shift ended, I had a rough total in my head that made my jaw tighten. Not because of the amount, but because of how normal it had become to carry it. I drove home in silence again, this time without the music I usually keep on out of habit. At home, I set my bag down and didn't bother changing. I opened my laptop and started pulling statements properly. No skimming, no assumptions. I made a spreadsheet the way I'd been taught to do things in uniform. Clean, labeled, dates lined up. I didn't rush. I didn't stop when it got uncomfortable. There it was, laid out without commentary. Years of Navy pay redirected, justified by a shared story I'd been telling myself. Family helps family. Education matters. She'll appreciate it later. That last part lingered longer than the rest. I thought about the party again. Not the laughter. The certainty in her voice when she said she did it on her own. That confidence didn't come from nowhere. It came from distance, from time, from slowly deciding that my role in her life was optional, maybe even inconvenient. I closed the laptop and leaned back, hands on the table, feeling something settle that I hadn't expected. Not anger. Anger would have been easy. This was colder, heavier, like recognizing you've been carrying weight that was never meant to be permanent. My phone buzzed. A text from her. Just a photo of her diploma with a caption that said, "Crazy night." No apology, no acknowledgement. I didn't respond. Not because I was playing a game. Because I didn't know what response would still be honest. Dinner was basic. Whatever I had left in the fridge. I ate standing up, thinking about all the times I'd eaten like that before a late watch, or after a long shift, telling myself it was temporary. That everything I was postponing would come back around. Later that evening, I took out a small box from the back of my closet, the one I keep paperwork in, old orders, certifications, things I might need again. I added a printed copy of the spreadsheet folded neatly. It didn't belong there yet, but it needed a place. I sat on the couch after that, not doing much of anything. No TV, no scrolling, just letting the day catch up. I realized something simple and uncomfortable at the same time. I had never once asked my sister what she thought my service was worth. I had assumed respect came automatically. That assumption had cost me more than money. When you're in the military, you get used to being misunderstood by people who haven't lived it. That doesn't usually bother me. This was different. This wasn't ignorance. This was convenience. My service had been useful when it paid her bills, and invisible when it didn't fit her narrative. Another message came in. This time from our mother, asking if I'd made it home safe. I replied yes. She sent a heart emoji. I didn't read anything into it. Families smooth things over by instinct. I wasn't ready to do that yet. I went to bed earlier than usual, not because I was tired, but because I wanted the day to end cleanly. Sleep didn't come fast. My mind kept circling the same point from different angles, testing it like a loose tooth. If I stopped paying, what would happen, not as a threat, as a fact? The answer came quicker than I expected. I turned onto my side and stared at the wall, already running scenarios without trying to. Not revenge, not confrontation, just reality. What changes when support disappears? What holds up on its own, and what doesn't? That question followed me into sleep and stayed there steady and unresolved, like a task you haven't been assigned yet, but know is coming. I unlocked my phone before my alarm went off and saw her name sitting at the top of my notifications again, this time paired with a forwarded email screenshot. No context, just the subject line circled in red like it meant something I was supposed to understand without asking. The subject read Scholarship Confirmation Final Review Complete. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I was confused, but because my stomach had already started doing the math. She'd mentioned a scholarship before, casually, the way people drop details they don't expect to be questioned. I remembered nodding relieved. Scholarships made everything easier. Scholarships meant the numbers I'd been juggling might finally shrink. I opened the image and zoomed in. The email wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to a generic admissions inbox. No name, no student ID, no award amount. Just a vague congratulations and a line about eligibility being contingent on additional documentation. The date didn't line up with when she said she'd received it. Neither did the sender. I locked my phone and sat there on the edge of the bed, feet flat on the floor, feeling the air in the room go thin. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was wrong, and wrong has a sound once you learn how to listen for it. On the drive to base, traffic crawled, giving my thoughts more room than I wanted them to have. I replayed past conversations, not emotionally, just mechanically. The way you replay instructions to make sure you didn't miss a step. Every time she'd mentioned financial aid without specifics. Every time she'd said, "Don't worry, it's mostly covered," right before asking for another transfer. At work, I pushed it aside. The Navy doesn't pause because your family drama decided to get interesting. I went through my tasks, checked off boxes, followed procedures. But during a break, I pulled up my email and searched her name. There it was. Buried in forwarded messages I'd barely glanced at before. A chain from the school's financial office that didn't say what she'd claimed it did. No award letter, no confirmation of funds, just reminders about outstanding balances and payment deadlines. I felt stupid for not seeing it earlier. Not betrayed, stupid. There's a difference. Betrayal assumes malice. This felt more like assumption on her part, that I wouldn't look too closely. I didn't confront her. That was the instinct I had to actively shut down. Old habits die hard. Ask for clarification. Give her a chance to explain. Smooth it over. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. She'd get defensive. She'd accuse me of not trusting her. She'd cry. Someone would tell me I was overreacting. Instead, I saved the emails. That night, she called me. Not to talk about money, to complain about how tired she was, how post-graduation life was already stressful. I let her talk. I responded where it made sense. Neutral, supportive. I didn't ask about the scholarship. When she hung up, I sat there for a moment with my phone still in my hand, noticing how easy it had been for her to assume my role would stay the same. Listener, fixer, backup plan. I opened my laptop again and added a new tab to the spreadsheet. I labeled it Aid Claims. Then I started listing dates next to what she'd told me versus what the records actually showed. No commentary, no conclusions, just alignment. The pattern didn't take long to show itself. The next few days were quiet on the surface. I went to work. I worked out. I answered texts. I sent the usual monthly transfer because cutting it off abruptly would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. The difference was internal. I wasn't operating on trust anymore. I was operating on verification. She slipped up again without realizing it. A text about a fee that popped up out of nowhere. The amount she asked for matched a charge I'd already seen on a statement labeled as optional housing upgrade. I pulled the invoice from the school's portal using the login she'd once asked me to help set up and forgotten to change. Optional. That word sat there in plain English. I didn't respond right away. I waited until later that evening and sent a simple message asking what the fee was for. No accusation, no tone. Just a question. Her reply came back fast. Too fast. It's required. Everyone has to pay it. I looked at the invoice again. Everyone didn't. That was the moment something shifted from suspicion to confirmation. Not because she lied. People lie all the time. Because she lied casually, without hesitation, to someone she knew had been paying her way for years. That takes a certain level of comfort with dishonesty. I added the screenshot to a folder on my desktop. Then I renamed the folder. Not her name, not evidence, just a date. The Navy trains you to notice patterns before they become problems, to document, to keep your emotions out of assessments. I wasn't angry yet. I was alert. There's a difference between being hurt and being awake. Another call came from her later that week this time, asking if I could send money earlier than usual. Her tone was light, almost bored, like this was a routine inconvenience she assumed I'd handle. I told her I'd check my schedule and get back to her. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long minute, hands resting in my lap, thinking about the phrase she'd used at the party. I did this on my own. That wasn't confidence. That was rehearsal. I didn't change my behavior outwardly. That was important. I kept things normal, predictable. If she thought everything was fine, she wouldn't tighten up. She wouldn't get careful. And careful people leave fewer gaps. I started paying attention to how she talked about school now that it was over. The way she avoided specifics. The way she brushed off questions about transcripts and final paperwork. The way she redirected conversations back to me whenever things got uncomfortable. None of it was dramatic. That's what made it useful. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with a laptop open and another set of statements pulled up, I realized something that settled deep and stayed there. This wasn't about one lie. It was about the structure that lie supported. And structures don't fall because of one crack. They fall because the weight they're built on disappears. I closed the laptop and stacked the printed pages, neatly adding them to the box in my closet. Not because I needed them yet, because I would. I went to bed that night with a clear head and a very specific awareness. The story she was telling about herself didn't match the paperwork, and paperwork, unlike speeches, doesn't clap for you. I didn't shut the laptop this time. I left it open on the table when I went to refill my coffee, letting the numbers sit there like they belonged. When I came back, nothing had changed, which was the point. The truth doesn't move when you look away from it. I logged into the school portal again, slower now, clicking through pages I'd ignored for years, because I trusted her summaries more than the details. Tuition history, housing charges, meal plans, optional fees broken down into neat categories that didn't care about intentions or excuses. Just paid or unpaid, required or elective. The first thing that stood out was timing. My transfers lined up perfectly with balances being cleared. Not partially, fully. Whatever I sent the account zeroed out within hours. That meant two things. She wasn't supplementing my help. She was depending on it completely, and she knew exactly when to ask. I pulled up my bank statements next to the portal and started matching dates. It felt mechanical, like prepping gear before an inspection. Line by line, no commentary, just alignment. The pattern became obvious fast. Every time there was a charge that wasn't mandatory, a request followed. A new phone plan, better housing. A program fee that turned out to be a parking upgrade. I remembered conversations that made more sense now. Her saying, "It's only a little more." Her shrugging when I asked why costs kept rising. The way she always framed it like the alternative was failure, like saying no meant I didn't believe in her future. I didn't confront her. I didn't even sigh. I added another column to the spreadsheet and labeled it Use. That's when the numbers stopped being abstract. Navy pay doesn't stretch far. Anyone who's ever lived on it knows you plan weeks ahead, sometimes months. You decide early what you can live without. Over the years, I decided I could live without a lot. New furniture, a newer car, travel, even savings. I told myself it was temporary, that once she graduated, I'd reset. What I hadn't accounted for was how comfortable she'd become spending money that cost me something real. I scrolled further back and found the semester she upgraded apartments. She'd told me it was required for her program. It wasn't. It was a choice. One that came with better lighting, newer appliances, and a higher monthly bill I covered without question. At the time, I'd just finished a deployment extension and was too tired to argue. I sat back in my chair and let that memory land where it belonged. My phone buzzed, a message from her asking if I'd sent the transfer yet. No greeting, no context, just expectation. I didn't answer right away. I checked the portal again. Another charge had posted that morning. A graduation-related fee that wasn't required. Optional regalia. Premium photos. I typed a response asking what the charge was for. Again, neutral. She replied with a vague explanation that didn't match the invoice. I asked for a breakdown. She took longer to respond this time. When her answer came, it was defensive. She said I was making a big deal out of nothing, that she'd just graduated and didn't need this stress, that I was acting like money mattered more than family. I stared at the screen and felt something settle in. Not guilt, distance. I sent the transfer anyway, smaller than usual. Enough to cover the required balance. Not enough to cover the extras. I didn't announce the difference. I didn't explain. I just watched. The reaction was almost immediate. Another message, then a call. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice sounded different, tighter, less confident. She said something about a mistake about the portal being confusing. She said she'd pay me back soon, which was new. I saved the voicemail. Over the next week, I kept doing the same thing, checking, matching, sending only what was necessary. The requests became more frequent. The explanations less clear. She started complaining about how tight things were, how post-grad expenses were piling up. I listened without responding much. At work, everything stayed steady. That mattered. I didn't want my personal life bleeding into the one place that requires consistency above all else. I did my job, followed orders, and went home with my head clear enough to keep sorting facts from feelings. One evening, I noticed a charge that didn't belong at all. A transfer from the same account I'd been sending money to, redirected to a different name. A roommate, according to the note. The amount matched what she'd asked me for that week. I checked the date. Same day, same hour. I didn't feel surprised. I felt confirmed. I added the transaction to the spreadsheet and highlighted it. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was careless. Careless means comfortable. Comfortable means patterns. I thought about all the times she'd told people she was independent. All the speeches about self-made success. All the eye rolls when someone mentioned my job like it was something she'd outgrown. Independence built on someone else's paycheck has a shelf life. It works until the person holding it looks down. My mother called that night asking if everything was okay between me and my sister. I said yes. That wasn't a lie. Okay doesn't mean unchanged. It just means functional. After the call, I sat at the table again and reviewed everything I'd collected so far. Not obsessively, professionally, dates, amounts, claims versus records. It was all there. Clean, boring, undeniable. I printed the updated spreadsheet and slid it into the box with the others. The box was getting heavier, but I wasn't carrying it around. I knew where it was. That was enough. I went to bed later than usual, not because I was stressed, but because I was alert. There's a difference between feeling wronged and realizing you've been managing a system you didn't design. Systems don't respond to feelings. They respond to inputs. The next morning, I woke up to a text from her saying she'd figured things out and didn't need help that week. No explanation, no apology, just relief disguised as confidence. I replied with a thumbs up and got ready for work. As I pulled out of my driveway, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because I recognized the look. The one you get when you've stopped guessing and started confirming. I drove toward base with the sun just coming up. Already adjusting numbers in my head. Already aware that money tells the truth faster than people do if you let it. I opened the document on my phone while standing in line at the commissary, rereading the same paragraph for the third time because something about it refused to sit right. It wasn't the grammar. It was too polished, too confident, the kind of writing that sounds finished, even when it's supposed to be raw. She'd sent me the file the night before without asking, just a casual, thought you'd want to see it attached to her final capstone paper. No explanation, no pride, just assumption. I'd skimmed it then and told her it looked good. That was before I slept on it. Before my brain started doing what it does when details don't line up. Back home, I pulled the paper up on my laptop and read it properly. Not as her sister, not as her support system. As someone trained to spot inconsistencies because mistakes in my line of work don't get excuses. The argument was strong. The citations were dense. The tone didn't match the way she usually talked about her work. It didn't even match the way she talked, period. I highlighted a paragraph and copied it into a search bar. Nothing fancy, just a sentence that felt too complete. The results loaded faster than I expected. There it was. An academic article published years earlier by a graduate student at a different university. Same structure, same phrasing, different author. I didn't jump to conclusions. I scrolled, compared, highlighted again. Another paragraph, another result. This time from a thesis archived overseas. My chest didn't tighten. My pulse didn't spike. I just sat there, hands on the keyboard, watching confirmations stack up without needing my permission. I checked the references next. Some were real, some were cited correctly, others led nowhere. A few were legitimate sources used in ways that didn't match the original context. Enough to look intentional, enough to pass a surface check if no one looked too hard. I thought about how often she'd complained about deadlines, about how stressed she'd been, about how professors expected too much. I'd assumed it was pressure. Now it looked more like avoidance. I saved screenshots, not dramatically, just methodically. Page numbers, URLs, side-by-side comparisons. I labeled everything with dates and sources. I didn't feel clever, I felt precise. Later that day, she called me excited. She said her advisor had praised the paper, that it might even get published in a student journal. She laughed like it was a surprise. I congratulated her because the words came out automatically, but something else had already shifted. After the call, I logged into the alumni portal she'd bragged about gaining access to early. She'd once asked me to help reset her password when she was locked out and never changed it after. I hadn't thought much of it then. I thought of it now. I checked her course history. Grades were high. Consistently high. Higher than her test scores suggested they should be based on the complaints she'd shared. I clicked into assignment submissions where they were available. The writing style varied more than it should have. Some papers were uneven, rushed clearly hers. Others were clean, too clean. I ran another paragraph, then another. It wasn't all stolen. That was almost worse. It meant she knew how to write. She just didn't always bother. She knew when she could cut corners and when she couldn't. She knew the system well enough to exploit it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of that settle without trying to reshape it into something easier. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress-induced sloppiness. This was strategy. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was upset, but because my brain kept reorganizing what I thought I knew about her. It's strange how quickly admiration turns into something else when you realize it was built on borrowed work. The pride I'd felt at her graduation shifted into a quieter, sharper awareness. The next morning, I reviewed the school's academic integrity policy, not out of revenge, out of curiosity. I wanted to know what lines existed and how clearly they were drawn. The language was straightforward: plagiarism, misrepresentation, sanctions ranging from probation to revocation. No ambiguity. I thought about the party again, the confidence, the way she'd dismissed me like a footnote, the way she'd framed her success as inevitable, earned solitary. That narrative depended on no one asking too many questions. It depended on people clapping and moving on. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't hint that I knew anything. I kept my responses neutral, supportive enough to avoid suspicion. The last thing I needed was for her to get careful. Instead, I started organizing. I created a separate folder on an external drive. Nothing flashy, just documentation, screenshots, PDFs, copies of original sources, timestamps, everything cross-referenced. I wasn't building a case yet. I was preserving facts. At work, I found myself noticing how similar this felt to prepping for inspections. You don't accuse, you don't assume, you verify, you document, you wait until someone else asks the right question. She texted me a few days later, frustrated about a delay in her diploma being mailed. She joked that bureaucracy was the worst. I almost laughed at the irony. Almost. That weekend, I visited our parents. Not to talk about her, to check on them. The house felt the same, familiar, comfortable. They asked how she was doing. I said she was busy. That was true, busy keeping plates spinning. On the drive home, I replayed everything I'd collected so far. The money, the lies, the writing, the confidence built on support she pretended didn't exist. The picture was clear enough now that I could stop squinting. I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine running, thinking about one thing very plainly. Success earned dishonestly doesn't collapse on its own. It needs pressure. Not emotional pressure. Structural pressure. The kind that comes from systems doing exactly what they're designed to do when given accurate information. I turned off the engine, grabbed the drive from my bag, and went inside, already rearranging priorities without changing my tone with anyone who didn't need to know yet. I set my bag down by the door and didn't bother turning on the lights, letting the house stay quiet while I moved through it on autopilot. The drive home had rearranged something in my head, and I didn't want noise interrupting that. I placed the external drive on the table right next to the stack of printed statements and sat down without thinking too hard about what that meant. Up until that point, I'd still been reacting as a sister, even when I was verifying facts, even when I was lining up dates and amounts. Part of me was still hoping the picture would soften if I stared at it long enough. That hope expired somewhere between the ignition turning off and my keys hitting the counter. I opened the laptop again and plugged in the drive, not because I needed more proof, but because I needed order. Emotion doesn't help with that. Structure does. I created folders the same way I'd organize a work file. Financials, academic records, communications. Each one got subfolders. Each document got renamed with a date and a description that didn't editorialize. This wasn't anger. Anger would have rushed it. This was something quieter and more permanent. My phone buzzed with a message from her while I was working. A link to a job posting she was excited about. "Looks perfect, right?" she wrote. I read it once, then set the phone face down. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to help her prepare to proofread to plan. Not because I was withholding, because I was done inserting myself into outcomes she wanted credit for alone. I kept working. The more organized everything became, the easier it was to see how long I'd been cushioning her from consequences. Missed deadlines I'd covered with last-minute transfers. Poor planning I'd solved with flexibility on my end. I wasn't just support. I was insulation. And insulation, once removed, changes temperature fast. I didn't block her. I didn't confront her. I didn't hint that anything was wrong. That wasn't strategy yet. That was clarity. I needed to see what she'd do without my constant adjustments smoothing things out. Over the next week, I changed my behavior in small ways. Nothing dramatic. I responded to messages slower. I asked clarifying questions instead of fixing problems immediately. I stopped anticipating her needs before she voiced them. The difference showed up quickly. She got irritated when I asked for details, defensive when I didn't jump at requests, confused when I didn't volunteer reassurance. It wasn't that she suddenly needed more. It was that she noticed the absence of something she'd stopped recognizing as optional. At work, the contrast was sharp. I took orders. I executed. I logged outcomes. There was comfort in that simplicity. The Navy doesn't care about narratives. It cares about accuracy. I realized I'd been giving my sister something I didn't even give myself. Grace without accountability. One evening, she called me, her voice tense in a way it hadn't been before. She said things felt different lately, that I seemed distant. I told her I'd been busy. That wasn't a lie. I was busy seeing her clearly. She asked if I was upset about the party. The way she phrased it was careful, like she'd rehearsed it. I said no. Also true. I wasn't upset. I was finished pretending the moment didn't matter. She exhaled like that settled something for her, then pivoted to talking about her plans. The future she was outlining didn't include me in any meaningful way. Not as support, not as context. Just as background noise she assumed would stay constant. I listened without interrupting, noting the confidence, the assumptions, the way she framed everything as already earned. When she hung up, I didn't feel hurt. I felt resolved. That night, I took the box out of the closet and moved it to a more accessible shelf. I added a new section divider labeled Timeline. Then I started mapping events in sequence. Transfers, emails, submissions, claims. It wasn't complicated, it just required honesty. There's a specific moment when a relationship changes shape, even if the people in it haven't acknowledged it yet. That moment doesn't come with a speech or a dramatic realization. It comes with a decision you don't announce. Mine happened sometime after midnight, sitting alone with paperwork spread out like I was prepping for a briefing no one else knew about. I stopped being her sister in the way she'd been using the word. That didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I stopped compensating. The next day, I declined a request from her for money without offering an alternative. I told her I couldn't swing it that week. She pushed back. I didn't budge. The conversation ended awkwardly. I let it. Later, I checked my accounts. No new charges posted. No emergencies materialized. The world didn't end. That was important. I reviewed the academic integrity policy again, not because I was planning anything, but because I wanted to understand the system she'd been navigating. It was clear. It was fair. It relied on evidence, not intent. I closed the page without bookmarking it. That weekend, I ran into an old shipmate at the gym. We talked about deployments, about how weird it is to measure time in rotations instead of seasons. He asked how my family was doing. I said they were fine. That answer held. Driving home, I thought about how often I'd justified things by telling myself family is different. That you give more, tolerate, more, absorb more. What I hadn't considered was that family can also get used to you absorbing impact until they forget it's happening. By Sunday evening, the house felt settled again. Not peaceful. Aligned. I knew where things stood, even if no one else did yet. I packed my bag for the next day and set my alarm the same as always. Before turning in, I glanced once more at the folder on the shelf, then turned off the light. There was nothing left to discover for now. What mattered was what I'd already decided not to do anymore. I woke up before my alarm and lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. The decision from the night before was still intact. No second-guessing, no urge to explain myself to anyone. I got up dressed and went about my morning like nothing had changed, which was exactly the point. Silence doesn't mean absence, it means restraint. Over the next few weeks, I let things play out. I answered messages when it made sense. I showed up to family calls. I didn't volunteer help. I didn't offer advice unless asked directly. I stayed polite, neutral, predictable. From the outside, nothing looked different. From the inside, I was watching carefully. My sister was busy building momentum. She updated her resume, applied to jobs, posted about the grind on social media like college had been a solo endurance test. She talked about networking events and interviews like they were proof of independence. I liked a few posts. I commented once with a simple congrats. Nothing that could be read as distance. nothing that hinted at scrutiny. She started getting interviews. That was expected. A polished degree and confident delivery go a long way when no one asks hard questions yet. She called me to tell me about one of them, breathless with excitement, already imagining the offer. I congratulated her again. I meant it in the narrowest possible sense. At work, I focused on my own responsibilities. The rhythm helped. Orders and tasks out, no room for personal narratives. When you stay busy with real accountability, it's easier to let other people believe their own stories. I kept notes on my phone, not about her words, but about timing. Interviews scheduled. Deadlines mentioned. Expenses claimed. She asked once if I could look over her cover letter. I said I was slammed that week. That was true. I didn't suggest another time. She didn't push. Instead, she sent it anyway, probably expecting I'd read it on my own. I didn't. Not because I was withholding support, but because I wanted to see what happened without my fingerprints on her work. The results were mixed. One company passed. Another requested additional materials. She complained about how competitive things were, how unfair it felt. I listened. I didn't fill the gaps with reassurance. Money requests slowed, then stopped altogether. On the surface, it looked like she'd finally found her footing. In reality, she was adjusting to a change she didn't fully understand yet. When support disappears quietly, it takes a while before the effect registers. Our parents noticed she was stressed. They asked if everything was okay. I said she was transitioning. That word covered a lot, without promising anything. Family dinners stayed cordial, she joked. I smiled. No one asked direct questions. No one needed to. I kept tracking. Not obsessively. Just enough to maintain a clear picture. She mentioned a background check for one role. Another asked for transcripts. Another wanted writing samples. Each requirement added weight to a structure I hadn't built, but now understood well enough to evaluate. She started reaching out more often, not for money, but for validation. Do you think I should follow up? Does this sound confident? Am I underselling myself? I answered selectively. Sometimes yes, sometimes with a question instead of advice. I let her sit with uncertainty she used to outsource to me. The Navy teaches you that timing matters. Move too early and you lose leverage. Move too late and you miss the window. I wasn't waiting out of fear. I was waiting because I needed her to finish climbing on her own. One afternoon, she sent a screenshot of an email from a company she was excited about. Second-round interview. Salary range included. Benefits listed. She added a line that said, "Looks like all my hard work is finally paying off." I stared at the message for a moment before replying with a thumbs up. That night, I reviewed the folder again. Not to add anything, to remind myself why I wasn't intervening. The lies hadn't stopped. They'd just shifted. Now they were outward-facing, aimed at employers instead of me. Same habits, bigger audience. I noticed something else, too. Her tone had changed. Less casual entitlement, more edge. She was carrying stress she wasn't used to managing alone. She'd always had a safety net. Now she was testing how far she could go without it. At the gym one evening, I overheard two people talking about how success favors confidence. I almost laughed. Confidence is cheap when it's borrowed, expensive when it's real. She finally landed an offer. Not her first choice, but close enough to celebrate. She called me that night, voice bright, already planning her move. I congratulated her again genuinely. Getting a job is an accomplishment regardless of what comes with it. She talked for 20 minutes straight without asking how I was doing. After the call, I checked the offer letter she'd forwarded. Entry level, conditional, subject to verification, standard language, nothing unusual, except for one line that made me pause. Employment contingent upon confirmation of academic credentials. I closed the file and leaned back, letting the chair creak under my weight. This wasn't a threat. It was a process, one she'd agreed to by applying, one she believed she'd pass because she always had. Over the next few days, she was restless. Excited one minute, irritated the next. She complained about paperwork, about delays, about how long everything took. I responded when necessary. I didn't fill the silence. The family group chat lit up with congratulations. She basked in it. Our parents were proud. I didn't interrupt that. Pride doesn't need correction in the moment. Reality does that on its own schedule. One evening, she asked if I thought she should celebrate early or wait until everything was finalized. I told her it was up to her. That answer landed harder than it should have. She hesitated, then laughed it off. I watched from a distance, not because I enjoyed the tension, but because distance gave me perspective. She was still climbing, still confident, still unaware of how much of her ascent depended on no one checking too closely. I wasn't pushing, I wasn't pulling. I was letting gravity do what it always does once momentum runs out. My phone buzzed while I was standing in line for coffee on base, and I almost ignored it out of habit. The subject line caught just enough of my attention to make me stop scrolling. It wasn't from my sister. It wasn't from family. It was from an address ending in edu, forwarded automatically into my inbox because it was tied to a contact she'd once listed as an emergency reference. I stepped out of line and opened it. The message was short, formal, neutral. It thanked the recipient for their patience and explained that an internal review had been initiated regarding academic records submitted for verification. No accusations, no conclusions, just process. I didn't feel anything dramatic. No rush, no satisfaction, just recognition. This was the sound of gears engaging. I finished my coffee and went back to work like normal. There was no reason not to. Systems don't need supervision once they're moving, they just need space. By lunchtime, my sister had texted me twice. The first message was casual, asking if I'd seen any weird emails lately. The second came 10 minutes later and wasn't casual at all. She asked if I'd heard from anyone at her school. I replied that I hadn't. That was true. She called a few minutes after that. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. When I listened later, her voice was tight words rushing each other like she was trying to outrun a thought. She said there must be some mistake, that schools audit things all the time, that it was probably nothing. Probably nothing is what people say when they don't know how much something is. That evening, I checked my email again. Another message had come through, this one addressed directly to her, but copied to the contact she'd listed years ago and forgotten to remove. It explained that the review would involve comparison of submitted work against original sources and verification of financial aid claims. It listed documents requested. It listed a timeline. No emotion, just steps. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice, then closed my laptop and made dinner. Not because I didn't care, because caring doesn't change procedure. She didn't wait long to call this time. When I answered, she jumped straight into talking, barely pausing for breath. She said the school was overreacting, that everyone borrows language, that it wasn't fair to look at old work now that she was moving on. She asked if I knew anything about how these reviews worked. I told her I didn't. That was a lie of omission, not fact. I knew how reviews worked. I'd spent my career inside systems built on documentation and verification. I just wasn't obligated to explain that to her. She asked if I'd ever accessed her school portal recently. I said no. That part was also true. I hadn't logged in since the night I'd finished organizing what I needed. The system didn't require my presence anymore. Her tone shifted. Not angry, afraid. She said she didn't understand why this was happening now. I didn't answer right away. Silence isn't punishment, it's space. She filled it with speculation, then with frustration. I told her the school probably had its reasons. I told her she should respond to their requests promptly and honestly. That advice was solid. She didn't thank me. Over the next few days, the pace picked up. She forwarded emails asking for help understanding what was being requested. Draft responses she wanted me to read. I declined politely, said I was swamped. Suggested she reach out to the academic office directly. Each time she grew more tense. Our parents called confused. They said the school had reached out with questions. They wanted to know if I had any idea what was going on. I told them I didn't have details. I said schools do audits sometimes, especially around graduation and job placement. I kept my voice even. My mother asked if my sister was in trouble. I said I didn't know. That answer held. At work, nothing changed. That was important. I didn't want any trace of this bleeding into my professional life. I showed up. I did my job. I followed orders. I didn't check my phone unless I was on break. When you live inside structure, you learn to respect it. My sister's messages started coming later at night. She said the review was expanding, that they were asking about her capstone specifically, that they wanted original drafts and notes she didn't have anymore. She said she felt targeted. I didn't correct her framing. Feeling targeted is common when accountability arrives unexpectedly. One afternoon, she sent me a screenshot of an email marked urgent. It requested an in-person meeting with the Academic Integrity Committee. A date, a time, a list of topics to be discussed. Plagiarism, misrepresentation, financial discrepancies. I read it once and set my phone down. She called again, voice shaking now. She asked if I thought she should get a lawyer. I told her I didn't know how those things worked in academia. I suggested she follow the school's guidance. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I opened the box in my closet and took out the folder labeled academic. I flipped through it slowly, not because I needed reassurance, but because I wanted to remind myself how clean the documentation was. Nothing speculative, nothing emotional, just comparisons and sources. I didn't send anything. I didn't add anything. I closed the folder and put it back. 2 days later, my sister stopped posting on social media. The updates dried up. No more career talk, no more celebration. The family group chat went quiet. Silence spread the way it always does when people don't know what to say yet. Our father called me late one evening, voice low. He said my sister had been crying all day, that the school was serious, that there might be consequences. He asked if I knew anything more than he did. I told him I knew schools don't launch reviews without cause. He didn't push. He didn't thank me. He just sighed. The meeting happened without me present. I knew when it started because my phone went quiet. No texts, no calls, just stillness. That told me everything I needed to know about how it was going. When my sister finally reached out again, it was with a single line. They're saying things that aren't true. I didn't respond right away. I waited until I was home, until my uniform was folded, and my bag was by the door. Then I replied with one sentence. You should answer what they ask. She didn't reply. The system didn't need my input anymore. It had documents. It had timelines. It had procedures. Whatever happened next wouldn't hinge on how anyone felt about it. That's the thing about formal reviews. They don't care who tells the best story. They care who can back it up. I turned off my phone and went to bed, knowing that momentum once transferred doesn't return to the person who let go first. I answered the call in the parking lot after my shift phone pressed between my shoulder and ear while I unlocked the car. My mother didn't waste time with pleasantries. She said everyone needed to sit down and talk. She said my sister was overwhelmed. She said things had gotten out of hand. I told her I was available the next evening. Not at their house, somewhere neutral. We chose a restaurant near the base. Quiet enough to talk, public enough to keep voices down. I arrived early and took a booth near the back, the kind with a wall on one side so you don't feel exposed. I ordered water and waited. They walked in together. My parents first, then my sister a few steps behind them, like she didn't want to be seen entering with us. She looked different, tired, not undone, just stripped of that certainty she'd been wearing like armor since graduation. She slid into the booth across from me and didn't meet my eyes. No one ordered right away. My father cleared his throat and said the school had escalated the review. He said they were talking about invalidating credits. He said my sister felt blindsided. My mother nodded along, eyes moving between us like she was trying to keep balance. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I took a sip of water and set the glass down carefully. The sound felt too loud. I asked my sister one question. Did you submit work that wasn't yours? She laughed, once sharp and defensive, then stopped when no one joined in. She said it wasn't that simple, that everyone does it, that professors expect collaboration, that the school was making an example out of her. I didn't argue definitions. I asked another question. Did you tell me you had scholarships you didn't have? Her eyes flicked up to mine, then away. She said she thought they were coming through, that she didn't want to worry me, that it wasn't intentional. My mother reached for her hand. My father looked at the table. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it between us. No drama, no announcement, just placement. The folder was plain, no labels on the outside. I didn't come here to argue, I said. I came to be clear. I opened the folder and slid out the spreadsheet I'd printed weeks ago. It was 6 pages thick, clipped neatly at the top. Dates, amounts, Notes stripped down to facts. I turned it so they could see. "This is every payment I made on your behalf," I said, keeping my voice level. "Tuition, housing, fees, transfers. It's all there." My sister stared at the paper like it might bite her. My father leaned in, adjusting his glasses. My mother covered her mouth. I continued without waiting for reactions. "I didn't track it at the time because I trusted you. I tracked it later because things stopped adding up." I pointed to a section highlighted in light gray. "These are charges you said were required that weren't. These are transfers that went to other accounts. These are months you said were covered by aid that didn't exist." My sister shook her head. "You're making it sound worse than it is." I flipped the page. "This is the total." The number sat at the bottom in bold. Not rounded, exact. Years compressed into one line. My mother exhaled slowly, like the air had been knocked out of her. My father leaned back, eyes still fixed on the page. My sister's voice rose. She said I'd offered to help. She said she never forced me. She said family doesn't keep score. "I'm not keeping score," I said. "I'm closing a ledger." She stared at me like I'd switched languages. I slid another document onto the table. Not academic records, not screenshots. An invoice. Simple. Clean. My name at the top, hers underneath. The amount repeated at the bottom. "I'm not asking you to fix the review," I said. "I'm not asking you to undo anything. I'm asking you to pay back what you took while telling people you did it on your own." My father asked if this was really necessary. He said we were family. He said things were already bad enough. I looked at him and answered honestly. "This is what necessary looks like." My sister laughed again, louder this time. She said I was trying to punish her. She said I was enjoying this. She said I was acting like I was better than her because I wore a uniform. That one landed differently. I leaned forward slightly. "I didn't bring my uniform into this," I said. "You did, when you pretended it paid for nothing." Silence settled in, heavy and awkward. People at nearby tables glanced over, then looked away. The waitress came by to ask if we were ready to order. My mother waved her off. My sister finally looked at the number again. Really looked at it. Her face shifted from anger to calculation. She said she couldn't pay that. She said she didn't have it. She said the timing was impossible. "I know," I said. "That's why this is between you and Mom and Dad now." My father stiffened. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that I'm done carrying this alone." I stood up and gathered the folder, leaving the invoice on the table. "You can figure out how to handle it. I've already done my part." My sister shot to her feet. "You can't just walk away." I paused, hand on the back of the booth. "I already did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anything. I just turned and walked toward the door, aware of the looks, but not concerned by them." Outside, the air felt cleaner, cooler. I sat in my car and let my hands rest on the steering wheel until the tension drained enough to start the engine. My phone buzzed once before I pulled out of the lot. A text from my father asking to talk more. I didn't reply, not because I was shutting him out, but because the conversation had shifted out of my hands. On the drive home, I thought about how strange it was that money became real only when it stopped being invisible. For years, it had flowed quietly from me to her, wrapped in good intentions and silence. Now it sat on a table, undeniable, waiting for a decision that wasn't mine anymore. At home, I put the folder back in the closet and locked the door. Not out of fear, out of closure. I made dinner, ate slowly, and didn't check my phone again that night. Somewhere across town, my family was still sitting in that booth, staring at the same number from different angles, realizing that stories don't pay balances, and confidence doesn't cancel receipts. I woke up before sunrise without the familiar knot in my chest, the one that had been there for so long I'd stopped noticing it. The house was quiet. No buzzing phone, no unanswered messages waiting to pull me back into someone else's emergency. I made coffee and drank it at the counter, standing watching the light change through the window. The first message came mid-morning, not from my sister, from my father. It was short. He said they'd spoken to a lawyer. He said they understood the number now. He said they wanted to make it right. I didn't reply right away. I finished what I was doing, folded my uniform, and headed out. There was no rush. Urgency had stopped being my problem. At work, everything moved the way it always had. Briefings, checks, steady routines that don't care about personal breakthroughs. I appreciated that. Structure has a way of absorbing excess emotion until what's left is usable. During lunch, I stepped outside and finally read the follow-up email from the university that had come in overnight. The review had concluded. Findings were clear. Academic misconduct confirmed. The language was formal, almost gentle in how definitive it was. Credits revoked. Degree invalidated. Notifications sent to employers who had requested verification. I closed the email and sat there for a moment, not savoring it, not flinching either. This wasn't victory. It was alignment. My sister didn't call that day. Or the next. The silence stretched heavy but honest. When she finally did reach out, it was through our mother. A message asking if I'd accept repayment in installments. No excuses, no anger, just terms. I agreed to a schedule and asked for it in writing. That was it. The first payment hit my account a week later. Then the second. Each one was clean, documented, boring. Exactly how accountability should feel. The money didn't make me giddy. It made me lighter. I gave my notice at work the following month. Not because I was leaving the Navy, but because I was transferring units. A better assignment. One I'd put off pursuing because it came with uncertainty and relocation costs I couldn't justify before. I could now. The day I signed the transfer paperwork, I noticed how steady my hands were. No second guessing, no internal debate about whether I deserved it. I did. I always had. I didn't announce anything to my family. They found out when they found out. There was no speech, no reconciliation scene. Just information moving at its own pace. My sister moved back home. I heard that through my parents, not directly. She took a temporary job unrelated to her degree. I didn't comment. Consequences don't need narration. One evening after a long day, I sat down with my laptop and pulled up the list I'd been avoiding for years. The one labeled someday. It was short. A couple of goals I'd written off as impractical when my paycheck had been earmarked for someone else's future. Classes, travel, savings. A place of my own that didn't feel provisional. I started crossing the things off not because they were done, but because they were finally underway. The repayments continued. On time, without reminders. My father sent a message once saying he was proud of how I'd handled everything. I replied with a thank you and left it there. Pride means more when it isn't demanded. I ran into my sister once unexpectedly at a grocery store near my place. She looked smaller somehow. Not diminished, just real. We exchanged nods, no conversation. The space between us felt appropriate. That night I realized I wasn't replaying the party anymore, or the speech, or the moment she laughed. Those memories had lost their grip. They were facts now, not wounds. I opened my banking app out of habit and scrolled past the repayments to my savings account. It was growing again. Slowly. Honestly, mine. I thought about how often people mistake silence for weakness, how often they confuse patience with permission. The truth is quieter than both. It waits until systems catch up. A few weeks later, I stood in a small apartment with boxes stacked along the wall, keys warm in my hand. Nothing fancy, clean, functional, mine. I set my bag down and looked around, imagining the shape of days that didn't revolve around damage control. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. One sentence. I'm sorry. I read it once and set the phone face down. Not because I didn't accept it. Because acceptance doesn't always require response. I spent that evening unpacking, putting things where they belonged, letting the space take on weight and purpose. When I finished, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and let the quiet settle. The Navy teaches you how to move forward without ceremony. One step, then the next. No fanfare required. I'd spent years investing in someone else's trajectory, assuming mine would wait. It hadn't disappeared. It had just been deferred. Now it was back in front of me, clear and uncomplicated. I went to bed that night, knowing exactly where my money was going, exactly who it was for, and exactly why. That clarity was worth more than any apology I could have asked for. What this taught me is simple, even if it took years to learn. Loyalty without boundaries turns into permission. Sacrifice without honesty becomes invisible. Family revenge stories aren't really about revenge at all. They're about finally choosing truth over comfort and self-respect over silence. I didn't win because I yelled louder or hurt anyone back. I won because I stopped carrying weight that was never meant to be mine, and let accountability do its job. If this family drama felt real to you, it's probably because you've lived some version of it too. If you want more revenge stories, and family revenge stories like this one told straight and honest, subscribe to the channel. These stories aren't about fantasy. They're about what happens when people underestimate the wrong person